With the recession in full swing, a lot of people are curious, concerned, or pick any emotion that is possible. And I assure you, somebody is out there having it. What is going on with the housing market? Why haven't prices fallen yet? And when will they? Well, in today's video, I want to bring you the data and dive into the history here in Ocean City to show you exactly why they haven't and to forecast when they might. Let's take a look. We are going to get very analytical here, maybe a little too much, but I want to show you two different graphs and then talk through some of the big changes and the big things that you're likely to notice here. So the first graph here on the left, we have sales volume by year in Ocean City. So if you've been listening to me for any length of time, right, you'll know that the market has slowed way down, especially recently. But what does that mean? It's just like when somebody says the area is not so great for flooding, good for flooding, bad for flooding. What exactly does that mean? We need an anchor point here. So I wanted to look back through the year 2000, which is all the data that I have access to see exactly what the sales volume has been and just how stark the drop may have been, as well as what is normal. So back in 2000 through 2005, you could see things were on quite a run here. And the blue line here is the total sales. Orange is the total listed. I want you to ignore that for the moment, but I will talk about that in a second. So the blue line, we go way up. We have peak at about 1,300 properties sold in a given year. We then fell off a cliff, dropped all the way down to 663 in 2006. We floated around a little bit. Hurricane Sandy happened in 2012. As you can see, it was on a nice trajectory. Until that happened, we take a step back. We slowly climb our way out until we hit 2020. So 2020, two things happened, right? Obviously, COVID, that's not one of the two things I'm going to talk about. But we had a lot of demand and we also had lower inventory. So the fact that we sold almost the record amount of homes ever sold on the island in 2020 is a miracle, considering the highest point during this time frame of the available inventory was nearly 1,900 active listed properties. In 2020, that was about 400. So as you can see, inventory where we were at 400 is well below the max, and that max is not normal. Normal and average is about 600 to 650 odd properties, give or take, in any given year, looking over this 20-year span. So we are well below in 2020. We know inventory continued to drop all the way through the summer of 2022, at which point we are about back to, again, around 300 total properties for sale, half of what the average is. So that in and of itself, right? I always like to say we can't sell what doesn't exist, right? You can't buy what doesn't exist. We have a very interesting phenomenon I've talked about in the past, and it's so prevalent that I'm not going to stop talking about it, with what's called the lock-in effect, right? If you already own here, if you own a primary home, if you own real estate anywhere, your rate is likely well below exactly where we are in the 7% range. 99% of all mortgages are below 6% in the United States. So anybody who's going to be buying right now, unless you're in that one unfortunate percent, you're going to have a higher mortgage rate. So what does that even mean? There needs to be a strong incentive, really, in a time like this for somebody to step out of a sub 4%. The average is just over 3%. The median, I should say, is just over 3%. To step out of that, to go to a 6 plus, even 7% mortgage rate. That is tough to do. So with this supply-demand imbalance we've seen the demand drop. A big portion of that is because, again, a lot of our transactions come from people who are moving up in Ocean City, closer to the beach, to the bay, to a single family, whatever the case is. Those people are having a really hard time justifying the decision to do that. So the demand has fallen off a cliff. And again, I don't have a chart that can show you that, but I promise you it is way, way down. And that's reflected in the months of inventory. Again, I talked about that in the last video on the market update, showed you the single family is about 7 to 8 months of inventory, well above normal, but condos are still about 4.5 months. So that said, people are having a hard time moving up. And if nobody is going to be buying, if they can't buy or they don't think it's worth it to buy, they're also not going to sell. So we have both buyers and sellers stepping away at the same time. So our inventory should have skyrocketed. I thought it was going to skyrocket in the month of October. closer to 350, 400. It just didn't. A lot of people are hunkering down, making the decision to make their current home work, whatever that means. I know people are adding pools, they're building on bigger decks, adding additions. All of those are less expensive than going up to a 6 or 7% mortgage rate. So without that added supply boost, right, we already know that there is almost no developable land left on the island. We're going to bump up against that wall at some point really hard, but we're not there yet. But still, we need more supply. And if it's not going to be coming from existing homeowners who are moving up or getting off the island, again, some will, but not enough, and we can't build it, where's it going to come from? What's going to give? So let's now talk about this orange line a little bit. And this blew my mind when I pulled it. I had to make several phone calls to people at other agents here who I'm good friends with, who have been around the block and were in it since the early 2000s to get a sense of what the heck happened here between 2009 and 2010, where our total amount of listed properties, right? That's not active inventory. That's if we were to look how many listings hit the MLS over the entire year. What is that number? That is total listed, because that's an astronomical increase, right? Absolutely ludicrous, going up to 1,600 from 774. So there are a couple factors, and I don't have an exact scientific answer, which pains me like you probably can't even imagine. But a couple factors here. Number one, we had a lot of agents start to take on a strategy of taking down a listing and putting it back up with a lower price instead of doing a price reduction. That, in effect, resets your days on market, makes it look like it's a new, fresh listing, even though it's not. Now, I could see where that's a part, right? That's going to play some factor, but that is way too much activity there and too much of a jump for it to just be that. So another piece of the puzzle is during the 04, 05, 06 timeframe, we had people taking on the adjustable rate mortgages, right? And this, over these few years, is where people got underwater, but were kind of okay until those rates adjusted, and a lot of those rates went up. When that happened, people were truly underwater and had to sell and get out. So that does and would result to a lot more listings, but again, not that many. The last and final piece that I think plays a big role here is during the financial crisis and during the subsequent crash, we had some true, I will say, corporate level developers move into the island. Now, it's a lot of people who've lived here and have been doing it anyway, but they weren't doing it at scale. They weren't doing it at big levels. That also picked up over these years to the point where these listings would increase. And why they've stayed so high, I think, has a lot to do with, again, two of those strategies. Number one, agents, I'll say, playing games in the MLS to reset days on market, because that would count maybe 2, 3, or even 4 times as 4 listings for one property, whether it sells or not. And then the developments, right? You have them coming in 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 6s, depending on the build that was done. So what we saw here is a huge gap, right? And again, we were trending very, very much in line, listings and sales, up until we hit 2009. And then we have this huge gap. And again, I don't fully understand it. Those 3 reasons make sense enough to me why they may have stayed up there. But now we see, right, after 2020, total listings is crashing down to 1,200 from where we were in 2020. And before that, at about 1,800. So it's a third less total listings. Along with that, total sales has plummeted. And again, that makes sense. If we're staying roughly stable with the amount of total listings and sales, if they're linear-ish in relationship, if the listings fall, the sales would have to follow suit. So that's where we are. Now, 2 other things I want to point out about this, right? So with the total sales being 686, and that is through October, that doesn't count November, we still have December. This will be higher, but it's still going to be low. It's going to fall right near this trend line, though. So this trend line gives you about what the average would have been. We'll call it 900 odd properties per year. If we end up short of that, historically, what that has meant, and I'll go to the second chart here in a second, historically, that has meant prices have come down. And if we end up close to that or above, prices tend to increase. So let's move over to the second chart here. So average price by year. We have yellow, or there's no yellow, orange being condos and blue being single families. Again, here we are in 2005. We have subsequent crash. Condo prices went down 25%. Single families, I don't want to focus on, because a lot of the noise, and especially a lot of this growth, comes from smaller homes being torn down and big monsters going up. It's harder to do that with condos. So simply put, that rise is going to be harder to depend on and to really count for anything. But we had a 25% price decrease from 05 to 06. It's the biggest single year drop that we ever had. Now, again, if we shift back over here from 05 to 06, our total inventory and our total sold dropped well below that trend line. So we have prices going down. So I think you can see where I'm going with this. As everything continued to finally increase again, starting in 2018, maybe 2017, they really took off together in tandem. Now, if we have sales that stay low, but if that's a direct result of lack of inventory, and I just had this conversation with an agent today at the closing table, we have clients who have very specific needs and their budgets are not low. We can't find them what they want because it doesn't exist. It's either number one, not listed, or number two, the price is simply too high. And what does too high mean? Too high means it is too high compared to where the metrics, the data, the comps say that it should be. If you price it in line with that, if you price a home in line with everything, it's still going to be very hard to sell. If you adjust slightly for the increase in interest rates, those homes are still moving. You can still have multiple offers. So all of that said, I saw a study recently done by CoreLogic, which is a very, very big and usually accurate data solution company. Their Case-Shiller, and I don't want to get too jargony here, but basically their home price forecast index, and it's not just theirs, the Case-Shiller index is used universally. For the first time, this came out earlier this month, 2023, homes are set or projected to appreciate by 3.9%. Their forecast for the prior 3 months had shown that into 2023 and starting in 2023, we would see our first home price decrease. Again, not deceleration, not, oh, it's no longer appreciating at 10%, now it's 2%, but an actual decrease. That changed. Now, I don't know why that changed. I'm digging into it and I haven't been able to find a concrete answer. But my point of bringing that up, when will prices drop, right? If we do not see more inventory, prices at large are not going to drop by much, if at all, which I know goes against what I had been saying for the past few months. I was expecting a 5, maybe 10% price decline as things slow down. But again, I expected inventory to be higher than where it is. Demand is still higher than where I thought it would be. I can count 5 listings in the past week that went under contract that I looked at when they got listed. Again, to myself, to other agents, said, no way. There's absolutely no way. They're at least X% too high under contract. So even though demand is way down, it's not gone. Inventory is higher than it was, but it's still 50% of what is normal in historical terms over the past 2 decades here in Ocean City. So what should you do with this information? My guidance to you is to, as always, keep your eye on the market. I understand that the biggest fear point or pain point or hurdle that you just can't clear right now is the mortgage rate. I'm not going to be one to tell you to date the rate, marry the house, right? There's some inherent risk in that I simply don't feel comfortable saying that is the smart thing to do. This needs to be a longer term decision than maybe you had initially planned on, right? And I'm always a long-term thinker. I want you to make the right decision the first time. If I never help you to buy another home, great. That means I did my job and we had a thorough conversation. We future-proofed your decision so that your purchase works for a very long time. If that's the case, it is nearly a guarantee that at some point in the future, you will be able to refinance to a lower rate, right? I can't say if that's next year, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. I don't know. Nobody does. But if you are making a true long-term decision, and if you're making the decision to buy here in Ocean City for reasons that resonate with you, not what the media says, not what your neighbor says, If this is important for you to be able to make memories with your family while everybody is still home, let's say before the kids go to college, whether that's with parents who are aging, whatever your why is, if your why really still drives you in this direction, let's have a conversation, because I'm starting to see, even though list prices are not necessarily dropping, I'm seeing it in certain areas like West Avenue, sometimes Bay Avenue. Prices actually are starting to trickle down a bit. But I'm seeing some homes going under contract for a substantial amount less than they are listed, sometimes within even days after they're listed, because sellers are not slow, right? They're as savvy as buyers. They understand if they get a good offer, even though it's less than they wanted, if depending on how they got to that asking price, it may still be the right thing to do, is accept that offer. So over the coming months, this is the time to poke and prod, right? You don't need to buy. Nobody does need to buy a second home, as lovely as it is. Most owners don't need to sell. So instead of getting into that catch-22, I encourage you to take your shot, because if you don't take your shot, I promise you somebody else will, whether it's now, next week, next month, and you'll see that home and the price it sells for, and you'll go, oh man, if I had known that they would have taken blank, I would have offered that. Well, the ones who win are the ones who act. So don't pause. We need to take action here in order to get you and your family the memory base and the generational wealth building tool that owning property in Ocean City has always been into your hands. So if you have any questions, as always, you can contact me directly. Contact info is in the description, or you can drop them right in the comments. I love engaging with people down there, because if you have the question, I promise you other people do as well. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you on the next video.